The development context of Farthest Frontier Update 1.0 is one of those cases where the passion of the studio Crate Entertainment is imprinted on every detail of the process. From the beginning, the project was seen as a true personal dream, especially for Arthur Bruno, CEO of Crate, who wanted to create a city builder inspired by the nostalgia of classics like Settlers 2 and Caesar 3. This made the game born much more as an experiment of love for the art than a production focused on market trends, which already gives a special charm to every design choice of Update 1.0. Talking about Update 1.0 is, inevitably, talking about a long journey in early access, with more than 3 years of continuous community feedback. Every advancement, polish, and even every delay in the schedule was justified by the idea that the game would only reach the finish line when it was truly refined. There was even a postponement of the update to October 2025, a movement that is not common for successful independent games, with more than 1.2 million copies sold and very positive reviews since the beginning. A striking aspect of the development was the process of constant iteration on central systems, such as the impressive tech tree that, in the final version, reached the mark of 142 points. I felt that the team didn't just want more content for content's sake, but that every new function really changed the DNA of the simulation, the technology, the new policies. Everything needed to significantly impact the player's experience. They themselves mentioned that they even discarded entire ideas because they didn't believe they added anything of substance. Another personally admirable point was the focus on optimization and accessibility. The roadmap released didn't promise great graphical revolutions, but rather absurd gains in performance, especially in huge cities, 2,000 inhabitants or more, and refinement of UI and navigation systems. There is something very authentic about these small, silent revolutions. The pursuit of fluidity instead of technical excess, making the game playable and stable for every type of player, from the enthusiast to the most casual. It is undeniable that Update 1.0 carried not only content ambitions with new buildings, bridges, policies, monument systems, and even voice acting for the villagers, but also an identity of its own, a direct result of the relationship between the team and the community. The model of collaborative decisions and feature lock, adopted in the final months, shows how Crate committed itself to not losing creative control, but without failing to listen to those who will really spend hours and hours managing villages and surviving the medieval chaos. Farthest Frontier Update brings a noteworthy revolution for city builder fans. The introduction of the technology tree is the kind of addition that completely changes the pace of the game. Before, everything was a somewhat linear sequence. Now, every important construction needs to be unlocked as the player evolves as a village manager. This provides that injection of freshness and a sense of progression, where each new choice opens up very varied paths. The feeling is that it's finally possible to customize the settlement's growth, exploring different strategies with each new campaign without being limited to the same standard script of old evolutions. And I admit, at certain times I simply stopped to scour the tree, thinking about which direction to take, feeling that familiar thrill of exploring a new game again. The monument mechanic, a major novelty, finally brings a more structured and purposeful endgame. Building and completing these monuments not only gives a huge sense of accomplishment, but also activates victory objectives, something very welcome, as city builders often leave the feeling of an infinite game without major rewards. Now, finishing a monument is an event, a goal that transforms long matches into epic journeys. The most interesting thing is how each monument proposes unique challenges, forcing the player to adapt their economy and their priorities to get that special boost. And deep down, that's where creativity in village management explodes, stimulating improvisation and boldness in urban projects. In combat, the final version provided a real tweak for the better. The battle animations are more refined, and the archer's intelligence finally makes sense. Now, selecting military companies is less clunky. The retreat to garrison button really works, and city defense has become a savory tactical minigame. For those who enjoy a struggle, the balance between bandit attacks, natural threats, and the need to evolve military technologies makes every raid a tense experience. I confess that I really enjoyed testing creative defense positioning, especially taking advantage of the new bridges. Yes, there is bridge construction now, to create bottlenecks and traps that gave my city a lease on life in critical moments. Speaking of construction, the pace of urban expansion changed in a subtle but noticeable way. The performance was clearly smoother, so giant cities can finally grow without annoying freezes. New types of buildings and urban planning options have arrived, and flexibility has increased. It is possible to design more efficient neighborhoods or even greenhouse neighborhoods to escape environmental disasters, all with more options for general village policies, a detail that caught my attention. The increase in the entertainment radius and the improvement of desirability areas make it easier to create that stylish metropolis without sacrificing efficiency, something I always found limited in the old versions. On the resource front, especially agriculture and food, the rebalancing is cruel and fair at the same time. Crops now require real planning, and any slip-up in choosing crops can be fatal in the long run. I saw sensitive improvements in the management tools. It became more enjoyable to micromanage production. And whenever I thought there would be surplus food, a new challenge arose, be it climate or pests. At these times, the move was to pause and access that recently unlocked policy in the technology tree to improvise a solution. This dynamic of quick response to disaster added a strategic layer I hadn't seen in any similar simulator yet, something that made a difference for me. The visual immersion and the vibe of the game had an upgrade. The animations are polished, the movement of the inhabitants became more natural, and even the details of the maps and the seasons seem to gain new life. It's not just a matter of looking pretty, but it makes observing the village part of the pleasure of playing. Hours pass while watching the daily life of the characters, seeing each crop cycle and every festival in the village center. There is a contemplative aspect there that recalls the best city builders of the 90s, only updated. And that resonates a lot with those who, like me, enjoy wasting time exploring every corner of their own village for pure visual pleasure. The final version of Farthest Frontier delivers a visual experience that impresses with its ability to create realistic and saturated atmospheres at the same time, maintaining excellent readability even with the level of detail present in every building and environment. The graphics manage to convey a sense of a living world through carefully crafted textures, where every building seems inhabited and worn by time, with clothes hanging in the wind, vibrant fields, and rivers that completely change personality as the seasons follow one another. The transition from the vibrant green of summer to the autumnal orange and finally the icy and menacing white of winter is simply spectacular, giving a temporal dimension that few city-building games can capture with such competence. This visual progression is not just cosmetic. It genuinely makes you feel like you are observing a real settlement crossing the cycles of nature, something that similar games like Banished never managed to convey with such effectiveness. The Unity game engine was exceptionally worked on by Crate Entertainment, and it's impressive how they managed to extract such sophisticated visuals from this engine. The artistic creation process reveals an absurd attention to detail. Each construction has multiple layers of texture maps, including normal maps for surface details, specular maps to control light reflections, glow maps that determine which areas shine in winter, and even specific snow maps that define where snow should accumulate. Each building also has decals applied to the surrounding terrain, showing clean earth, paving stones, and wagon marks in the mud, creating a perfect integration between the structures and the environment. Unity's sub-object system allows plants and weeds to grow organically around the constructions, adding another layer of realism that makes all the difference when you zoom in on the details. This combination of real photographs retouched by hand with digital painting on the textures results in visuals that perfectly balance historical authenticity with contemporary aesthetic appeal. The visual progression of the constructions is another high point of the Update 1.0 graphics, where the buildings not only improve functionally, but also visually represent the settlement's growth and prosperity. Houses start as primitive log cabins where inhabitants merely shelter from the elements, but as the city prospers, these dwellings gradually transform until they reach the Tier 5 mansions that truly show the community's wealth and splendor. This architectural evolution is not only satisfying to see, it creates a powerful visual narrative that emotionally connects the player with the development of their settlement. When you observe a Tier 4 house next to an initial cabin, you can concretely feel the entire journey your city has traveled. And this is intelligent visual design that serves both aesthetics and gameplay. The concept and 3D modeling work demonstrates meticulous care with authentic historical references to medieval architecture, ensuring that each structure seems plausible within the game's temporal context. Combat animations received a massive upgrade in Update 1.0, completely polishing all movements from invaders to spearmen. This refinement was possible because Crate's animation team literally grew from 0 to 3 full-time animators during development, and they took advantage of these resources to completely revise the inhabitant animations that had already been improved in version 0.9.7 with idle behaviors that made the settlement seem much more alive instead of efficient and cold machines. Combat now has a significantly superior visual appeal, with more fluid and impactful movements that make military confrontations much more interesting to watch. These animation improvements perfectly complement the already robust visual system, adding dynamism and personality to characters who previously seemed more mechanical. The inclusion of idle behaviors makes the inhabitants really seem to be living their lives instead of just executing pre-programmed tasks, and this considerably elevates the immersion provided by the game's graphics. The lighting and visual effects system demonstrates considerable technical sophistication, with soft shadows, well-crafted particles, and vegetation that dynamically responds to environmental conditions. The graphics offer extensive configuration options, including adjustable supersampling, different levels of anti-aliasing, soft shadows, soft particles, depth of field with controllable intensity, and foliage settings that significantly impact performance. The flexibility of these options allows players with varied hardware to adjust the visual experience according to their needs. Although the highest settings, especially shadows, anti-aliasing, soft shadows, and foliage, are quite computationally demanding, the dynamic lighting system creates distinct atmospheres in different areas of the map, with natural light effects changing drastically between morning, afternoon, and night, adding cinematic depth to the experience. The depth of field allows attention to be focused on specific areas of the settlement, creating visual compositions that look almost photographic when you stop to observe specific details. Overall, the graphics of Farthest Frontier Update 1.0 represent an impressive achievement in visual design for city-building games, combining historical authenticity with modern rendering technology to create a world that seems simultaneously ancient and vibrant. The meticulous attention to detail in every layer, from the hand-painted textures to the procedural vegetation systems and architectural progression, demonstrates a rare artistic commitment in this genre. The performance issues are real and need to be addressed, but they do not diminish the fact that when you are simply watching your city grow and transform through the seasons, Farthest Frontier offers one of the most satisfying and immersive visual experiences you can find in a city builder. The way the game captures the feeling of building a living, breathing medieval settlement through its cohesive visual choices is simply exceptional. Farthest Frontier in version 1.0 presents a performance that, honestly, is a dilemma for any city builder enthusiast. The game, which left early access in October 2025, brought many promises and content improvements, but the optimization still leaves a lot to be desired. The feeling that remains is of a title that strives to be too complex and detailed for current hardware, especially regarding the CPU. This makes the game feel a bit too heavy for what most PCs can process, even when limited to relatively small cities. When playing, it's noticeable that the city simulation is one of the main performance bottlenecks. Each villager delivers resources, works, moves, and interacts with the environment independently, which generates an enormous load on the CPU, especially for the processing cores. In practice, this means that even modern machines with powerful processors face significant frame drops when the population exceeds a few hundred inhabitants. For me, this really takes away some of the fluidity and immersion, because in the beginning the game is fluid, but when the village's complexity grows, the performance plummets in a frustrating way. Visually, the game is not that demanding for GPUs, which draws attention to the real root of the problems, the processing of the detailed simulation. Some users who tested show that high-end GPUs barely help improve frames when the CPU power does not keep up, as the processing is quite single-threaded. It's a shame, because the game has super pleasant graphic effects and atmosphere, but it is the technical simulation decisions that weigh heavily. For those who like to explore every nuance of city management, the feeling is of being in a race against time, and not against the enemy. There are some solutions to circumvent the freezes, such as disabling the Steam overlay and reducing specific graphic details. But these are more workarounds than true solutions. I tested some myself, and yes, we managed a slight gain in frames, but nothing that completely transforms the gameplay. The feeling is that the game lacks a robust optimization patch, which may have been sacrificed in favor of the version 1.0 launch in an attempt to finalize the project within the schedule. For a game that proposes to be a detailed and deep simulator, the lack of scalability in the simulation is a serious problem. After the city size exceeds about 800 inhabitants, the frame rate drops drastically and the game becomes practically unplayable at normal speeds for those who, like me, like a faster pace. This causes many players to choose to play at reduced speeds, which can slightly break the game's rhythm and the feeling of total control over the village's progression. What calls my attention a lot and gives me a little hope is the high level of detail and the passion that the development team clearly put into the game mechanics. However, they still haven't managed to make the experience accessible in terms of performance for half of the player base who have median or even good PCs. It seems that technical ambition ended up overshadowing the need for a lighter engine or a more balanced approach to simulation. Overall, my opinion is that Farthest Frontier 1.0 is a classic example of how technical depth can be the biggest villain of performance. The game has a solid foundation and a design that charms with its complexity. But the performance is not up to par, especially on mid-range PCs like mine. The feeling is that, to truly enjoy the game's potential, you need to have a really powerful machine or accept playing at more modest settings in smaller cities. The expectation now is that future patches will focus on improving this issue because the potential is there. It just needs to be unlocked with more efficient and optimized code. Look, Farthest Frontier is leaving early access on October 23, 2025, and the first thing I need to make clear is that version 1.0 brings massive changes to the game. We're talking about a technology tree with 142 points, a completely new policy system, monuments with victory conditions, dozens of new buildings, and bridges. After 3 years in early access, Crate Entertainment is releasing what they call the most comprehensive city management and farming simulator available. About whether it's worth buying at launch, I'll be honest, the game is leaving early access with over 1.2 million copies sold and has maintained a very positive rating on Steam throughout this period. That's no small feat for a medieval city builder made by a team that never had more than 8 people working on it. The real kicker here is that the price is jumping from $30 to $35 at launch. So if you still grab it on the last Steam sale before the 23rd, you save those $5. Now, there is an important caveat I need to mention. Games in early access historically presented some serious bugs, such as villagers who stopped working, constructions that took forever, and problems with the collection system. But that was before. The game spent 3 years being polished and receiving community feedback. Version 1.0 promises to have solved these problems and brings a complete rebalancing, but there is always that risk of launch bugs appearing with so many structural changes. The big change that excites me is this new technology tree that transfers the unlocking of buildings from the Old Town Center tier system to a system where you choose what to unlock first. Want to focus on military? You can prefer agriculture? Go for it. This gives enormous freedom to play your way and not follow a rigid linear progression. The monuments also add that long-term objective that many city builders lack. They are endgame structures that require mastery in specific areas and give absurd benefits, like 80% faster construction or soldiers gaining veterancy twice as fast. If you played Banished and thought it was good but wanted more, Farthest Frontier is practically the natural evolution of that. The game has realistic weather with seasons that change everything, an elaborate trade system, and a beautiful visual that gets even better when you zoom in and see the clothes hanging on the clothesline of the houses. But it's not for those who want something casual. Here you will need to plan every detail or your city will collapse. My personal recommendation? If you are a fan of medieval city builders and complex management, it is definitely worth buying at launch, especially because the game has already proven to have a solid structure during early access. But if you are the type who prefers to wait to see if there will be launch bugs or wants to grab it on a future sale, that is also totally understandable. Just don't expect a discount anytime soon because the game has just increased the base price. The content coming in 1.0 is substantial enough to justify the investment now, especially considering that the team has already shown commitment to post-launch support. In the end, Farthest Frontier in version 1.0 seems to be the type of game that will hook you for hundreds of hours if you enjoy the genre. There are people with over 1,500 hours playing since early access. It is an ambitious project that is finally reaching the point the developers envisioned, and after 3 years of development with community feedback, the chances of it being a solid experience are very high.